Welcome back to Is Anything Real? The show where we torch illusions and drag bad metrics out into the sunlight. Here's today's hot take. If your conversions are just page views, you're not reporting performance, you're committing fraud with better fonts. Joining me is Dana DiTomaso, president of Kickpoint, who's been calling out fake conversions and BS data setups for 25 years. She trains agencies, builds analytic systems, and has seen every flavor of conversion theater in the industry. Dana, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You got it. All right, you've said most paid teams don't even know what a real conversion is. What's the dumbest setup you've seen?
Don't come after me, paid teams.
You don't have to worry about NDAs here or anything violating those.
Yeah. No, I think the most, I would say, egregious one that I've seen was actually one that I was given. It was a remarketing tag, or it was a tag from, I think it was DV360. And it was what would be the remarketing tag, except they had attached not just the page view to it. They're like, add it to every page of the site. It was a page view, and it was add to cart, and it was checkout, and it was like create account or something like that. And I wrote them back and I was like, are you sure? They're like, oh yeah, just add this to every page. I'm like, but then every page would be add to cart. They're like, oh, it'll figure it out. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. And so and like the client, if I wasn't there, the client just would have added the code, right? And they'd be like, look how amazing our site is. But the thing is that I find is
that's when they would go, look, it's $1 billion in revenue that just came in magically.
And they're like, but yet I don't have $1 billion. What is going on here? Right. And I think that's the thing that kills me. And so another one is like a client will say, our agency said that we had X number of leads, and I go and look and we don't. What's going on here? And then I find out that the agency has set up, views of the contact page as the conversion, and that's what they're reporting on when it's actually like the form fill. And I also find too that a lot of paid agencies don't realize you can track if people actually filled out the form or not. You don't have to rely on a thank you page.
Right.
And so again, it's like, well, I don't know how to do that, so I'm just going to record a thank you page. And like, if you have no alternatives, like thank you page is fine. I would prefer that than the actual view of the page before people fill it out.
Right.
But we can do these sophisticated setups now, and just do that instead of just blanket recording this stuff, because it's never going to work out well for you in the end.
Right. I love how you're breaking it down here. Clicks don't equal conversions.
Nope.
Contact page views don't equel leads. Why do you think agencies keep getting away with not approaching it in that mindset, or keep getting away with it?
I think that's just like the turnstile of agencies, right? Where clients will go through an agency after a couple of years, and then they're like, oh, that's weird. And then they set things up with a new agency who, messes up things in a new and novel way. And then after a couple of years, they're like, oh, this isn't working out so well. And they go to another agency. And so it just keeps repeating with these agencies that just do mediocre. And then eventually the client's like, all agencies suck, which is not true. But like, the barrier to entry in digital marketing is a laptop, right? Like an internet connection. So it's not hard to go and say, hey, I'm an expert now. And the barometer for expertise is someone just saying, oh, I'm an expert. So and I think the actual experts are people who are like, oh, I don't know, I'll get back to you, because they're comfortable enough to say they don't know everything. And so a client is like, well, I'm just going to go with the person who says that they know what they're doing, as opposed to the one who wants to check back on things. And so you end up, because you're being honest, you end up not necessarily closing that deal. And instead they go with the flashy company with the bad conversions, but it looks good on the surface.
And they're probably worried about billable hours below it all also, right? And hitting that P&L that they need to hit. But say like a great real life example, I've seen this before. Say a client sees 100 leads in Google Ads, but there are 0 showing up in GA4. Where's that breakdown? What's actually happening there?
Yeah, I find that it's either they haven't set up things the same. So often in Google Tag Manager, for example, and paid people, if you don't know Google Tag Manager, definitely a skill you should learn. But what I find is sometimes I'll go into a client's GTM and they'll have a trigger, which is the thing that the tag listens to. So the tag is the code going off to GA4 or Google Ads, and it is attached to a trigger, which would be the form being submitted. And sometimes I'll see that they'll have a trigger for Google Ads, and they'll have a trigger for GA4, and they're two different triggers, even though it should be exactly the same trigger. You can use the same trigger more than once. You don't have to keep making new triggers. And so because of that, you're not measuring the same thing, and maybe the GA4 one broke because you had it, I saw one where it was attached to the button called, and the button was named submit. And so if they ever changed
Yep.
the name of the button from submit to something else, it would break. And then
Right.
the Google Ads tag was set up completely, the trigger was set up completely differently. So the Google Ads trigger kept working when they renamed the button, but the GA4 one broke, so it's set up in a different way. So
Right.
stuff like that, where you have really fragile triggers and unique triggers for each destination, can cause these kinds of problems. I much prefer having a single trigger that isn't very fragile at all, is based on something you know is going to work, even if the button's renamed, and you use that same one for GA4, Google Ads, Reddit, LinkedIn, etc. Just use the same trigger for all that stuff.
So really, we're not talking about a math error. It's a truth
Mm-hmm.
problem at its
Yeah. I
basis,
mean,
right,
there are
Dana?
situations for sure where the number of conversions you see in GA4 is going to be different than Google Ads. Like, that's just the internet. That's how that works, And same things like clicks and sessions is a really common one.
Yep.
Someone clicks on an ad twice, you have, within like 10 minutes of each other, you have 2 clicks in Google Ads, but you have 1 session in GA4 because their session was still active, for example. Like,
Right.
those kinds of things are pretty common. I have a blog post on my website that goes through all the common reasons why your data in Google Ads is not going to match your data in GA4, but it should be relatively close. It shouldn't be like completely off from each other. It'll
Right.
never match up. Don't try to make it match. You'll go crazy. If it does match, it's completely a coincidence. Go
Yep.
buy a lottery ticket. It doesn't mean anything.
It's your lucky day then if that
Yep,
happens.
exactly. Like, the stars aligned for you. Congratulations. This will never happen again.
Right.
Yep.
So I know you've also said that honesty in reporting really requires psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
How would you define what does that mean inside a marketing team?
Yeah, I think it means that it's okay to report on bad results. Not everything we do is going to be perfect. Not all the campaigns we create are going to be massive gems, right? There's just
Yep.
sometimes it's just like the wrong targeting, or you just didn't get the pulse of the audience right, or the keyword research wasn't necessarily on point, or, a million things could have happened. Like, there was a major, news story that day, or there was a natural disaster in the, like there was an ice storm in the area where you're promoting, for example.
Right.
And so that doesn't necessarily mean that like your campaign was bad. Sometimes maybe you just set it up badly, and that's, shit happens.
Yeah.
We've all been doing this a long time. You're not always perfect. That's okay. But I think that that's where the psychological safety comes in, that we all know that we all mess up at some point, and
Yep.
being able to say to your boss or your client, hey, look, this didn't go as planned. This is what we're going to do. Or this didn't go as planned. I genuinely have no idea why. We're going to dig in and find out. And
Yeah.
so being able to feel confident that you can say that without immediately getting fired, I think is a big part of that
Right.
psychological safety,
Right.
and I think it extends within the agency, but also with the client as well. And I think
Yep.
that as an agency owner, it's also, up to us as agency owners to say, look, don't work with clients who are going to completely lose their minds if things aren't always going, 300% growth with a
Right.
20% budget increase, right? Like, do not work
Right.
with those people. And I know it's hard to get rid of clients, especially, economics aren't necessarily the best right now. I've owned my agency for a long time. Like, I've worked for
Yep.
myself for like 25 years. So it's hard to be like in 2008, oh, never mind this giant economic crisis. Let's not work with jerks. But at the same time, like, don't reward bad people with good work. And so if a client routinely abuses your staff and you don't do anything about it, like,
Yep.
you're going to end up losing good staff as a result of that, or you can offset that client or jettison
Right.
that client. Like, there's good clients out there. You just need to find them.
I mean that really bleeds into why I think a lot of marketers who are listening today would probably admit they
Mhm.
feel pressured or have felt pressured to fake it. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that necessarily, as you just said, comes down to bad bosses, bad incentives, or just plain fear.
Hmm.
But let's sort of role play. What do you tell a CEO who demands perfect analytics in a world of
Yeah.
ad blockers, consent
Mhm.
banners, capture codes,
Yeah.
all these different
Oh yeah,
things
and I
flying
just
around?
walk them through like a realistic scenario. So my typical go-to is, I need to book pest control for my house because I live in an area where you have to spray for ants every year.
Yep.
So I do the Googling to find a pest control company near me. Great. Click on their Google business profile. It's all UTM'd. Good job, So you would have
Yep.
that attributed. But then to book, I'm not going to be home. So I text the link to my wife who's going to be working from home that day and be like, can you book and be here when they get
Yeah.
there? And so she clicks the link in the text message. It's now direct because I didn't send her the one with UTMs. I just sent her the link, right? And so the booking
Ooh,
comes in via direct,
I
even though
am
I found them, right?
that
And
hits a
so,
thread with me. I strip
right?
UTMs off of
Mm-hmm.
URLs even when I
Yep.
click on them in emails when I share them with other
Mm-hmm.
people, or
Yep.
I even for myself, Dana,
Mm-hmm.
We'll strip it off and then reload the page to actually work on the conversion. That's a don't tell anyone out there
You
I
are
did
the
that.
dark funnel. Yeah. And I think that that's a really common thing that people do, right? And it's not. And so I talked to the CEO and just like walk them through that scenario and be like, this is how real people use the internet. We can't make them follow our rules because we want perfect attribution.
Yep.
And then the other thing too, attribution is a journey, right?
Right.
Today is, we're recording this towards the end of September.
Yep.
And in a couple days, everyone's going to be generating those monthly reports. But what if I looked you up on Monday and then I didn't book until Thursday? Does that mean that I don't count because I happen to
Where
go
did
over
you
the
go?
completely artificial line that is a month,
Right.
And so
Right.
that's where things like rolling 28-day dashboards might be better than reporting on an artificial monthly basis, for example. It's really thinking about the idea of attribution as a journey. I think is a hard step for a lot of CEOs to get to. So I don't start
Yep.
there usually. I usually start with, here's a completely realistic scenario. How would you
Yep.
attribute this?
Yeah.
And part of what I always tell people too is like, I don't actually care how people got in touch with you. I don't care if it was trackable or not. I just want more people to get in touch with you. So if we're
Yeah.
doing our work well and more people are calling you, your phone's ringing, you're getting leads coming in, you'll see that in the reality of people getting in touch with you. It won't
Mm,
necessarily be reflected in totality in your reports because tracking is hard. And yeah, we track lots of different things, but that doesn't mean that we're perfect and we can never be perfect. So instead, we're just going to do things kind of look like they're going up and to the right. And your end, do you see an impact, with the actual, like, is your
right.
team busy? Are
Right.
you making money? Those are the
Right.
important things, not
Right.
necessarily the number of impressions you got on Search Console, which is
Well, that's
completely out of whack right now, for example, because of the changes that Google made to impression reporting that broke a bunch of rank tracking tools.
yep. Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's incredible the history that you have over that 25 years, and you were kind of tying into that
Yeah.
evolved culture of lying with data and how that
Mm-hmm.
continues to evolve. But I think the important thing that you just kind of touched on this analytics is not about perfection, and it should
Yeah.
never be about perfection. Just like anything in this world, nothing is actually ever perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the directional truth that you can act
Yeah.
on, and anything else just turns into theater.
Yeah, and I don't know how we became this idea of like analytics accountants. And this is
Hmm.
something that I really want us to walk away from because at some point somebody said, oh, in digital it's perfect. You can track everything. That was maybe true for like a second
Right.
before tabs were introduced in browsers. But we can't track everything. And I wish whoever said that never said that. I think I might have
Yep.
even said that at one point. And if so, I apologize. But the thing is like you can't track everything.
Yep.
And I think it's important for people to just realize that, just sit with it, just accept it into your heart. And
Mhm.
then just move on knowing you can't track everything. And
Right.
so one of the reports, for example, I've been recommending for people, although that is a little bit weird right now, is I've been recommending an efficiency metric, which is looking at the number of impressions of your site on Search Console, on Google Ads, billboards, how many
Yep.
people might have heard your radio ad, etc., dividing it by the total number of transactions, lead fill, whatever your like key event is, to use a
Right.
GA4 term,
Right.
dividing it by that. And then we're just looking at, is that flat or is it going up over time? Great. If it is going down, then what we're doing isn't necessarily having the same impact. Now, when I say
Right.
that's kind of broken right now is because there's this grand adjustment in Google Search Console where Google stopped basically broke ranking tools from being able to scrape their search results. And
Right.
so you suddenly might see a huge decrease in your impressions over the past couple of weeks. Like I'd say
Right.
about starting in mid-September, going down still is weird now at the end of September.
Yep.
And in that case, you might have to adjust your client's expectations accordingly. What I find really interesting about that is just the sheer volume of impressions that were coming in from rank tracking tools. I always knew there was some impressions in Google Search Console that were from rank tracking tools, but for
Yeah.
myself and clients, we're seeing is about half of the impressions were rank tracking tools, which is
Wow.
wild. I had no idea the scope of the problem. So, yeah,
Well, when
like
you start
half
to
of those impressions were just robots.
that's
Crazy.
wild. And then
Yeah.
when you think about the future of measurement, right? With GA4
Mm-hmm.
changing, cookies collapsing,
Yeah.
even the double-edged sword of AI writing the reports.
Mm-hmm.
Dana, do you think measurement is getting clearer or is it actually getting murkier? Or is
Oh,
it
I
just
think it's definitely getting murkier. I think we're we're gonna just go back full circle, back to spray and pray. That's
Mhm, mhm.
we're gonna be back to the 1930s again or something. And it's just we're gonna go full circle on this. I think
Yep.
at some point, ideally, and I think about Europe as is where we should be looking in terms of where measurement is going, because a
Uh-huh.
lot of the things that are happening with GDPR, other countries are going to pick up on that.
Right.
And really, the ideal state in the GDPR would be opt out by default, and then you would have to choose to opt in. You would have to make a choice to say yes, go ahead and track me, not what do you
Right.
want to do, track me, don't track me. It would be click this button if you want to be tracked. Who's going to click that button? Literally no one. And I
Yeah.
think that that's where we just kind of abused our toys, and now we've ruined them. And now we might just be going back to like rank trackers, like maybe web trends. This is its big moment to shine. And if
Yeah.
people don't remember web trends, it was like a log file analysis tool, because you can't hide from log file analysis,
Right.
but because you do have to access the pages. But at the same time, like maybe something like a log file analysis will go, because a lot of log files capture IP address and pages viewed, and
Yep.
technically that would be personal information. So maybe we won't even be able to do
Ooh,
that either, you know?
wow.
So this is where it's going to
Wow.
be like, where are we going to end up with this at the end? And it might just be, we're making guesses. I don't know.
Isn't this all just guesses sometimes? But
Yeah.
on the side of confidence, right?
Hmm.
Kickpoint's playbook workshops are 5,000 a pop.
Yep.
What do clients actually learn that agencies keep screwing up through that reporting?
Yeah, I find a lot of the time the setup is like okay. What happens is there's a lot of GA4s out there that were sort of set up in a scramble towards the sunset, and like, oh crap, I guess I better do this. And then there were no extra events set up, or there were things that set up that weren't quite right. And so often when I'm going through and doing the training with the client, I try to do an audit ahead of time just so I can see what I'm looking at. But I also talk to the client about, what are the questions that you're asking of your GA4? And then is your GA4 even set up to answer those questions? And if it
Right.
isn't, then we'll walk through the process of like, here's how to set up these things to measure the answers to those questions. Like, are people getting in touch with you? And then something else I try to emphasize too is we're pretty good at measuring, like, did people do the thing we want them to do? We're not great at measuring what stopped them from doing the thing that we want them to do.
Right.
So could they even see the button to convert? Did the form not load for them? Those kinds of things. I think those are also important to record as well. And so we
Right.
might not have that set up by the end of the workshops, but we might have them on the path of figuring out, like, what are the things I would need to measure to know that this person didn't do the thing that I wanted them to do.
You just, Dana, threw me on a flashback to my early agency days
Mm-hmm.
where we used to have to look at website information about eye tracking data,
Oh
right? And
yes,
where
yeah, ye olden
people's
days. Yep. Mm-hmm.
eyeballs could go. But anyway, if you
Mm-hmm.
could wave a magic wand and fix one metric obsession in the industry, what would you nuke?
Oh, bounce rate. Absolutely. No question. Like that's anyone who's watched my videos knows I hate bounce rate. In UA, bounce rate was so inaccurate. So in Universal Analytics, bounce rate measured if someone loaded the page but then didn't take an action. But if you weren't
Mhm.
measuring an action, for example, if you had an inline form that
Yep.
when it was submitted, it didn't take you to another page, that would count as a bounce because you didn't record that event when they filled out that form. They could have spent 20 minutes on that page. They could have read everything you had to say, but they didn't take an action that you measured. Therefore, they were a bounce. Hated it. In GA4, there's still bounce rate. It measures something totally different. So in GA4, there's engagement rate, and a session becomes engaged when someone visits 2 pages on the site, has your tab as their active tab for at least 10
Yes.
seconds. You can up that to 60 in the settings, or converts. That's a engaged session. Now, bounce rate is the inverse of engagement rate. Why do we need that? Because people complain and said, I miss my bounce rate, which is it's not even measuring the same thing. So if you're comparing UA bounce rate to GA4 bounce rate and you're wondering why they're different, that's why. But engagement rate is not a bad metric. I'm okay with it. But I would
Yeah.
like to get rid of bounce rate because it is just silly and misleading. We have engagement rate. Why do you need bounce rate?
Unless you're hopping on a pogo stick, right? Then bounce rate is a whole
Well,
different
and
different
bounce rate
number.
doesn't even mean anything if you think about what engagement rate is measuring. Like a session could become engaged because it's 10 seconds with the tab as the active tab.
Yeah.
Like, but maybe they left after 11 seconds. Is not that a bounce? Yeah.
Yep.
So don't use bounce rate. Just use engagement rate. It'll make me happy. Thank you.
I
Yep.
love it. I mean, hotline here, right? Data doesn't lie, people do. And the
Mm-hmm.
cost is truly client trust.
Yep.
Dana, this was data on fire right now. From fake conversions to truth and reporting, you've just armed a lot of listeners with a sharper BS detector. Where can folks find you and Kickpoint online?
Yeah, the best place to engage with me is on LinkedIn. That's where I post the most. And my website is currently at kpplaybook.com, but we're switching to analyticsplaybook.com later this year, renaming to
Ooh,
Analytics Playbook, just to reflect like the focus is just on analytics.
yeah,
So if you go to that domain now, it does redirect you, but the domain will be migrating later this year.
awesome. And one final question, Dana, for the agency founder listening who's maybe
Mm-hmm.
realizing that their amazing conversion rate is really just hot garbage. What's the one
Mm-hmm.
move they should make this week?
I think that they should probably start to measure a new engagement rate or conversion rate or whatever that metric is, measure it correctly, but then slowly start to wean the client from the old bad metric to the new good
Mhm.
metric. Because you can't just switch it and they'll be like, well, what happened? Be like,
Right,
hey, look, we're improving our measurement. We realized we were being a little too broad before. So now we're going to be measuring this, which is more specific. So your numbers are going to be lower, but it better reflects the reality of how people are engaging with you. And that's
right.
the narrative to take as you tell them, is just like frame it as a positive. Don't be like, hey, I didn't know what I was doing before, now I do. You want to be like, this is a little bit more precise,
Yeah,
this gives us a little bit more information, helps us set up better remarketing audiences, etc. Whatever that client is into, that's how you're going to phrase it. But make sure to also use the words the client uses. Not every client describes stuff as a conversion. They definitely
right.
don't describe stuff as a key event. So pick the right term that makes sense to that client. Use their own words when you're setting it up.
Get in their shoes a little bit, right?
Yep,
Think from where they're coming from. Awesome.
absolutely.
Well, thanks for tuning in to Is Anything Real in the podcast where we sift signal from noise and torch the mirages. I'm Adam W. Barney, and just one final thought. If your dashboards look too good to be true, they probably are. Demand, honestly, because fake conversions aren't just bad marketing, they're bad leadership. Dana, thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
If this episode of Is Anything Real resonated, you're probably at a moment where the old playbook isn't holding anymore. I work with transitioning founders and executives to install operating rhythms that hold under pressure. Not motivation, not hype. I've spent over 20 years inside high-pressure environments and worked with over 300 leaders through moments where clarity mattered more than speed. If you want clarity you can actually rely on, book a foundation call at adamwbarney.com. Clarity over chaos, always.